Democrats win the mayoralty in Miami, which has been a Republican stronghold for 30 years. What does that mean for Republicans? Plus, we get into the affordability debate. First, this year, while you're taking care of everybody else on your nice list, don't forget about yourself. Our Daily Wire Plus Christmas sale is live. New Daily Wire Plus annual memberships are 40% off. Your Daily Wire Plus membership unlocks our entire library of premium entertainment, including documentaries that are reshaping culture, like What is a Woman and Am I Racist? Our catalog of exclusive series, the upcoming 7-part epic, The Pendragon Cycle, Rise of the Merlin, and every uncensored, ad-free daily show from the most trusted voices in media. This Christmas, give yourself something with real substance, the gift that brings clarity and respects your intelligence. Go to dailywire.com/subscribe to grab your annual membership for 40% off. Alrighty, folks, so some flags are going up. Some red warning sirens are beginning to sound about Republican hopes in 2026 and, yes, in 2028, because American politics is like a pendulum. If it swings one direction one moment, then wait a minute, it'll probably swing back the other direction naturally. Right now, Miami has been Republican for decades. It's been Republican for decades, specifically because there's a large Cuban Republican population, very anti-communist. Well, for the first time in 30 years, Democrats have now taken control of Miami. That's after candidate Eileen Higgins clinched the city's mayoral election. Higgins beat out Trump-backed Republican Emilio Gonzalez in the Florida city's runoff Tuesday night. She becomes the first Democratic mayor in the city since 1998, according to the New York Post. The victory is an upset for GOP lawmakers around the country who rallied behind Gonzalez because, of course, South Florida has turned into a very red area over the course of the last 10 years or so. Florida itself was a very competitive area for Democrats up until about 2018, when Governor Ron DeSantis won an extremely narrow election against a man, Andrew Gillum, who would later be caught up in flagrante delicte with some awkward situations involving drugs in a hotel room, male prostitutes, perhaps. Anyway, that was relevant. That happened after the election. That was a narrow election in 2018. In 2022, DeSantis blew out his political opposition. And in 2024, Florida went to President Trump by a very heavy margin. Well, Miami has been Republican for a very long time. Apparently now it has turned blue. Despite the fact that Republicans rallied in favor of the Republican candidate, President Trump threw his weight behind the Republican candidate. He was joined by Ted Cruz, Rick Scott, and Governor DeSantis, but it didn't matter very much. Apparently, Higgins, the Democrat, had led Gonzalez 36-19 during the first round of voting. Amid a crowded field in November, she was the favorite to win this time. But this is a ding in the Republican armor for sure. Again, some of the early bellwethers are not moving in Republican directions right now. It is also a warning bell for Republicans with regard to the Hispanic vote in the United States. President Trump won an outsized share of Hispanics in the last election cycle. The polling shows that many, many Hispanics are falling off the Republican bandwagon right now because Trump solved some of the big issues like closing the southern border, but he has alienated an awful lot of Hispanic Republicans with some of the, shall we say, more public-facing ICE actions. He has also alienated some Hispanic Republicans because a lot of Hispanic Republicans were driven away from the Democratic Party by their social radicalism and DEI. Democrats have been smartly on a national level sort of moving away from those discussions and back toward, wait for it, affordability. So this is the issue of the day, affordability. Now, President Trump has labeled affordability a Democratic hoax, and I totally understand where he is coming from because affordability is a broad buzzword that encompasses many things. Right? Doesn't encompass the inflation rate. If we're talking inflation rate, Trump has brought down inflation to manageable levels. It's still higher than it should be, but it's not riding at 9, 10, 11% like it was under Joe Biden. If we're talking about energy prices actually are norming out under President Trump. When people say affordability, it is fair to say that very few people ever think that things are quote unquote affordable. Nothing is affordable. Right? If you are struggling economically at any time in your life, this means inherently you're going to think things are unaffordable. But really, when people talk about affordability, what do they mean? They mean that things are less affordable for them now than they were back in 2019. And that is what the polling data shows. That is what Americans think today. A new poll from Politico shows that nearly half of Americans said they find groceries, utility bills, healthcare, housing, and transportation difficult to afford. More than a quarter, 27%, said they have skipped a medical checkup because of costs within the last 2 years. 23% said they've skipped a prescription dose for the same reason. More than a third of Americans say they could not afford to attend a professional sporting event with family or friends. 46% said they could not pay for a vacation that involves air travel. Now, it is worthwhile noting all of those numbers are minority numbers. Those are not broad majority numbers. A quarter of Americans saying that they have to skip a medical appointment, or less than half of Americans saying they can't pay for a vacation involving air travel. With that said, overall, Americans are dissatisfied with how far their money is going right now. According to Politico, only 22% of voters who cast their ballots for President Trump in 2024 said that tariffs are helping the U.S. economy both now and in the long term. Meanwhile, when it comes to things like college costs, 62% of Americans say college isn't worth it because it costs too much or doesn't provide enough benefits. When it comes to food prices, half of those surveyed say they find it difficult to pay for food. A majority, 55%, blame the Trump administration for the high prices. Again, some of that is based on tariff concerns. When it comes to housing costs, a huge percentage of Americans are worried about housing costs and home buying. Only 10% of those who identify as MAGA Republicans believe the Trump administration is responsible for housing costs they see as unfavorable. But that figure is 3 times higher for non-MAGA Republican respondents. Nearly half of Americans find it difficult to afford health care, according to that Politico poll as well. And this isn't rooted in nothing. I asked our friends and sponsors over at Comet, a project of perplexity, how much have rental costs escalated since 2019 in the United States? Health insurance costs, food prices, college costs. And here is what Comet says. Rental, housing, health insurance, food, college have all risen substantially since 2019, with food and rent up roughly 20 to 25% or more, health insurance premiums up about 25%, average college tuition up around 8 to 12%, depending on the sector. I also asked Comet, how much have incomes risen in that same period, non-inflation adjusted? And the reason that I'm not adjusting for inflation there is if you're talking about the increase in food prices, some of that is the inflationary increase in food prices brought about by the Biden administration. So you have to use the same ruler. According to Comet, non-inflation adjusted nominal household incomes are up by roughly 10 to 15% since 2019, which is less than the increase in rents, food, and health insurance costs over the same period. So yes, you're making more dollars than you were in 2019, but those dollars aren't going quite as far. So both things can be true. Things are less affordable than they were 5 years ago, 6 years ago. And also, when Democrats talk about the problems of affordability, they're neglecting the fact that most of those problems emerged under Joe Biden. That is what Trump means when he says that the affordability argument is a hoax. He means they created an inflationary spiral that jacked up prices, and then they handed him a bad situation. And then he has brought inflation down to manageable levels, and now they're shouting about affordability. They can't shout about inflation because if they say inflation, everyone's going to look at Joe Biden and look at Trump and realize Trump brought the inflation rates down. So if they talk about affordability as a catch-all basket, that is a much more lucrative political line for them to pursue. All right, coming up, we'll get to President Trump talking about affordability. Is this narrative going to play first? This episode is sponsored by Birch Gold. Our first advertiser at the Daily Wire was, in fact, Birch Gold Group. In that time, we've helped thousands of Daily Wire listeners diversify into physical gold. Talk about peace of mind, especially when you see gold up over 50% this year. In all that time, the most successful promotion we've ever run with Birch Gold was the 24-karat gold-plated Truth Bomb, our version of a bunker buster on leftist ideology. Well, we happen to have an extremely limited amount in cold storage. Right now, until they're gone, with a qualifying purchase from Birch Gold, you can own a Daily Wire Golden Truth Bomb. Let Birch Gold help you convert an existing IRA or 401k into a tax-sheltered IRA in gold. If your purchase qualifies, they'll send you a Golden Truth Bomb. I bought more gold from Birch Gold this year because I was concerned about the vicissitudes of the economy. It's really easy. You call them, you ask all your questions, and now there's gold sitting in my safe. And yes, I'm up on that purchase. With rate cuts from the Fed in 2026, the dollar will probably be worth less. And what happens if that AI bubble actually comes to an end? Diversify. Just text my name, Ben, to 989898 to claim your eligibility before December 22nd. Don't wait. Text Ben to the number 989898 today because Birch Gold will run out of Golden Truth Bombs. Text Ben to 989898. Also, with our show sponsor, Policy Genius, you can give your family a gift that actually endures: the security of life insurance and lasting peace of mind. Nearly half of American adults would face financial hardship within 6 months if they lost their primary income. Policy Genius makes finding life insurance simple, helping you secure real coverage so your loved ones have the financial safety net they need when it matters most. Look, if you've been putting off life insurance, now would actually be an amazing time to sort it out before the year ends. Policy Genius makes the whole thing way less painful than you'd think. It's a simple online marketplace where you can compare quotes from all the major insurers in one place completely free. They've got a team of licensed experts who will walk you through everything. They'll answer your questions, deal with with all the paperwork, help you figure out what coverage actually makes sense for you without all that confusing insurance jargon. The whole point is to find you the most affordable policy that actually fits your situation. And based on thousands of 5-star reviews on Google and Trustpilot, they're clearly good at it. It's just a much simpler way to handle something that usually feels overwhelming. With Policy Genius, real users have gotten 20-year, $2 million policies for just $53 a month. Don't wait until next year. Give your family the gift of security today with Policy Genius. Head on over to policygenius.com/Shapiro to compare life insurance quotes from top companies. See how much you could save. That's policygenius.com/Shapiro. Here was President Trump yesterday in Pennsylvania.
They have a new word. You know, they always have a hoax. The new word is affordability. So they look at the camera and they say, this election is all about affordability.
Okay, so again, the reason he is doing that is because he is looking at the stats and he is saying, I did a better job than Biden. And he is right. He is doing a better job than Joe Biden. But Democrats are smart. If they just say affordability over and over, then they never have to come up with a solution, even if they created the problem in the first place. That is true with regard to healthcare, for example, where they keep talking about unaffordability in healthcare. And you and I may say to ourselves, wait, hold up. You're talking about unaffordability in healthcare. I thought Obamacare was supposed to solve all of this. Wasn't that your program? And the answer is yes. But if they talk about healthcare unaffordability, then they have to blame Republicans for the fact that they made it unaffordable in the first place. Because affordability is a present tense question. Are things affordable? Inflation looks back at history and says, are things going up, going down, or pretty steady? Affordability is not comparative. Affordability is just about what you feel in the moment. This is why Democrats right now are getting away with the fact that they radically expanded Obamacare subsidies under Joe Biden during COVID, generating artificial funding for a program that is non-feasible on a monetary level. And now they're leaving Republicans holding the bag, trying to say Republicans need to fill in the gap. This is the game that Hakeem Jeffries, the House Minority Leader, is playing. He's railing at Republicans for not expanding healthcare subsidies back to the sort of Joe Biden levels.
Time has run out. Democrats have been pressing our Republican colleagues for months to deal with the healthcare crisis that they have created. And in a matter of just a few weeks, tens of millions of Americans who live in every single state across this country are about to experience dramatically increased healthcare costs. In some instances, premiums are going to increase by $1,000 or $2,000 per month. How is that acceptable?
Okay, so, again, the game that he is playing here is they make it unaffordable. They destroy the mechanism for funding health insurance programs. And then they ask you to fill in the gap based on the current unaffordability. This is the beauty of being a Democrat. You can run a program into the ground, cost American taxpayers hundreds of billions, trillions of dollars with these welfare programs. And then, because people are dependent on them, you have to give them their fix, or they blame you for their current suffering. The Senate is about to propose a bill put forward by the Republicans that would allow those ACA tax credits, which are just Obamacare subsidies. Again, tax credits really are just checks because it's not as though it's credited against taxes you are paying. They're just subsidies. They would allow the ACA tax credits to expire and instead approve new funds to boost health savings accounts, or HSAs, which Americans up to 700% of the poverty level can use to buy bronze or catastrophic plans, the lowest tiers of insurance available under the ACA. It would also create the option for more people to buy those cheaper and less comprehensive plans. It would fund cost-sharing reduction payments. Under the Senate plan put forward by Republicans, eligible adults under 50 years old would get $1,000 per year deposited into that HSA. Those 50 to 64 would get $1,500 per year. That legislation would block using the money for abortion or gender transition procedures. Democrats are saying it's not enough. That if the Congress allows the ACA subsidies to expire, premiums will double for more than 20 million Americans who use them, so the $1,000 is not going to pay for the subsidies that Democrats have put into place when those subsidies expire. Sabrina Corlett points out the finances here. She says the average deductible for a bronze plan is $7,500, double that for a family plan. The HSA contribution doesn't extend to kids under 18. It's only $1,000 for an adult under 50. There's no adjustment for income, meaning that the proposal favors people who are wealthier and healthier. Senator Chuck Schumer is angry at the bill. He just wants more funding for Obamacare, which, again, this was supposed to solve the problem of Obamacare. It obviously didn't. Here is Schumer ripping Republicans.
The bill not only fails to extend the tax credits, it increases costs adds tons of new abortion restrictions for women, expands junk fees, and permanently funds cost-sharing reductions. Their bill is junk insurance. It's been repudiated in the past. The American people will repudiate it once again because it is junk insurance that puts the burden on people.
Now, what's hilarious about him saying that it's junk insurance is that he's talking about bronze plans available under Obamacare. You created that program. You created those catastrophic plans for people to purchase, right? It was you guys. This was your program. Purely Democrat lines, not a bipartisan proposal. And now you're calling it junk insurance. Okay, so again, the goal for Democrats when it comes to affordability is create subsidization schemes that make things unaffordable and then deceive the American people that subsidies are going to make them cheaper. And then when Republicans say no, blame the Republicans for it. Now, this does put Republicans in purple states in a difficult position. Senator Josh Hawley of Missouri is warning that Americans will blame Republicans if their premiums do skyrocket at the end of the month. He says, I just don't know how Republicans would explain that to 24 million Americans whose premiums are going to double. People at home are going to say, you're hurting me. You're making my premiums go up. You're not helping me. Why are you doing that to me? Senator Tom Tillis of North Carolina, who is stepping down from his seat, he said that people are currently paying $800 a month for health insurance. For a couple and 3 kids, they just communicated to me it's going to be twice. It'll be $1,600 a month. So $1,000 is not going to make up for that, obviously. You're talking about a $7,200 increase over the course of the year. The reality is that Republicans have never had a comprehensive plan to replace Obamacare because every time we get into a comprehensive plan, the devil is in the details. And the attempt politically to avoid blowback by providing very small HSA boosts, that is not going to work. Politically, listen, on an ideological level, I believe that the federal government should get entirely out of the business of funding health insurance. This should be a state and local governmental issue. It should be the social networks that we all exist in that help all of our friends who are sick and elderly pay for the health insurance bills. I don't know why the federal government is involved in this sort of stuff in the first place. None of this is in the Constitution. With that said, on a political level, if Republicans are going to try to do a solve, what they actually should do is they should probably boost those ACA subsidies for another couple of years, but include a bunch of riders that transition it out and make way for larger HSAs. In other words, provide people some sort of glide path toward a new future, as opposed to a hard stop. Hard stops in American politics typically create massive political blowback, and 2026 looks like it's going to be pretty ugly for Republicans anyway. So on a principle level, I totally understand why Republicans are saying don't continue the ACA subsidies. But I also understand that the political blowback is going to lead to Democrats in power in 2028. And Republicans who are pretending away the vulnerability that they have electorally here are missing the point. All right, coming up, President Trump continues to push his tariff policy. Americans aren't really in love with it. First, getting a wide variety of whole food ingredients into my diet is key, especially with constant work travel. Our sponsor, Balance of Nature's whole health system, makes it simple. Their convenient blend of fruits and veggies in easy-to-take capsules is kosher. It ensures I'm getting essential nutrients every single day without the hassle of prep work or meal planning. It's an effortless way to support my wellness goals while managing that busy on-the-go lifestyle. Balance of Nature's whole health system supplements, they're incredibly versatile. They're easy to work into your daily routine. The fiber and spice supplement blends smoothly into your favorite drinks, adding a warm aromatic depth from its spice blend. And if you prefer, you can even open up those fruits and veggies capsules and mix the powder directly into a smoothie or sprinkle it over your meals. What makes these supplements special is they're packed with 47 ingredients from 100% real whole fruits, vegetables, spices, and fibers, everything from psyllium husk and flaxseed to cinnamon, turmeric, mango, pineapple, wild blueberries, shiitake mushroom, spinach, kale, cayenne pepper, and so much more. It's a simple way to give your body the nutrition it needs every single day. I'm on the road right now. It's very easy to, get sick while you're on the road. And frankly, I need better nutrients, which is why I use Balance of Nature products. New and existing customers can get 50% off the whole health system for life with this limited time offer. Go to balanceofnature.com to claim the offer. Also, when we started Daily Wire, it felt like we had to figure everything out with minimal help. Editorial guidelines, studio setup, production schedule, branding. It was overwhelming. New decisions were necessary every day. Finding that one tool that simplifies everything when starting a business becomes a game changer and a lifesaver. For millions of businesses, that tool is our sponsor, Shopify. Shopify is the commerce platform behind millions of businesses around the world and 10% of all e-commerce in the United States. We even use it for our own Daily Wire shop to make sure things are running smoothly and efficiently so you can get all the goods. You might be asking, what if I can't design a website? Or I'm worried people haven't heard of my brand. Well, that's not a problem because Shopify has you covered from the start. They've got beautiful, ready-to-go templates that match your brand style and help you find your customers through easy-to-run email and social media campaigns. And if you need a hand with everyday tasks, their AI tools created specifically for commerce can help enhance product images, write descriptions, and more. Plus, their award-winning customer support is available 24/7 to share advice if you ever get stuck. Turn those dreams into and give them the best shot at success with Shopify. Sign up for your $1 per month trial and start selling today at shopify.com/Shapiro. Go to shopify.com/Shapiro. That's shopify.com/Shapiro. By the way, the same thing is true on tariff policy. The reality is that the president's tariff policy is widely unpopular. The argument that President Trump has been making with regard to tariffs is not a particularly successful one. So yesterday, he was speaking in Pennsylvania, for example, and he was, again, repeating this line that you don't need $37 for your daughter, you need steel. Okay, let's just be clear. There are a lot of Americans who would like to buy toys for their kids. And also, it turns out that tariffs on steel make steel more expensive. That is literally the purpose of a tariff on steel. Also, we do not actually have steel shortages from foundries in the United States. The reality is that steel is no longer a sort of core American industry the way that it was in 1955. Here's the president.
The one thing you need steel. You know, you can give up certain products. You can give up pencils. Because under the China policy, you know, every child can get 37 pencils. They only need one or two. You know, they don't need that many. But you always need steel. You don't need $37 for your daughter. 2 or 3 is nice.
Okay, I mean, we should point out at this point that, again, according to our sponsors over at Comet, Project of Perplexity, the United States currently produces 90 million metric tons of crude raw steel per year and consumes on the order of 90 to 95 million tons of steel per year. Any gap is covered by small amounts of net imports. But I don't understand why these are mutually exclusive. It turns out that we can have both steel and also dolls for our kids. Americans being told they need to make trade-offs have to have it explained to them why it is that you are asking for the trade-off. And if China, by the way, is a geopolitical enemy, then maybe we ought to treat it as such and not allow NVIDIA to ship its chips over there. Right, all of this is discombobulated and feels discombobulated to people. The same thing is true when it comes to President Trump's tariffs on the farmers. So the truth is, American farmers are suffering right now because many of the export markets to which we ship our goods from the agricultural industry, those export markets have had tariff rates increased. Here, for example, is the head of the American Soybean Association slamming President Trump's tariffs.
Well, this is a Band-Aid on an open wound. And again, we're thankful that there's something that this will help keep some farms in business. But what we truly need are market-based solutions. Those are sustainable long-term. Here domestically, we have opportunities for the administration to finalize the renewable volume obligations for biofuels here before the end of the year, the 45Z tax credit. We have numerous opportunities to expand markets worldwide, and we truly need demand. Because without demand, we're not able to receive a price that is economically sustainable for our crop.
So, again, farmers are not feeling great about all of this, but President Trump is saying the tariffs are making them rich. One of the rules of politics is that when people are feeling bad about their own personal economic situation, you can't tell them that they are actually doing great. Now, again, it may be true that they are doing better than they would have been under an alternative system, but just as an elected politician, right, the idea here is that you have to provide them some answer as to why things are worse or what you're going to do to make them better. Here's President Trump saying the tariffs are making farmers rich. Farmers don't really believe this, by the way.
And we just gave them right out of a tariff money, cost us nothing, right out of the hundreds of billions that we've taken in. We gave the farmers a little help, $12 billion, and they are so happy. And all they want is a level playing field. And now it's happening. And the tariffs are making them rich. It's going to be, you're going to see what happens over the next 2 years.
Again, according to the Yoder Institute, One analysis of the prior trade war that the Trump administration engaged in between 2018 and 2024 estimated U.S. farm export losses of about $27 billion. So it turns out the government interventionism is actually not a great plan when it comes to a lot of this sort of stuff. What you actually need, as always, is more deregulation, lower taxes, better incentive structures for businesses to create new goods, products, and services. And this is why the American economy, it feels discombobulated. It feels sort of schizophrenic. It feels on the upper hand on AI, like we're doing just amazing business. And it feels everywhere else like we're sort of hovering around. It's a little turbulent. We don't know quite what is going on. And that's fine. AI is going to pay off. AI will be great. I'm a big AI guy. I think AI is incredible. I think attempts to restrict the development of AI are likely to fail. I think that there will be transitional jobs. I think there will be temporary job dislocations, and then new industries will be founded. Life will actually get better. I think that case needs to be made by many of the AI tech bros who seem to sort of assume that people are fine with AI when in a time of transition, people are doubtful. But the reality is that there probably will be some winnowing in the AI field. That is very likely to happen. But I don't think that that winnowing is necessarily going to be as egregious as, for example, the dot-com bust of the late 1990s. There's a sort of robust debate happening in the tech and economics field about whether there will be a bust up, and if so, how deep is it? According to the New York Times, the dot-com boom, a period of wild exuberance and extreme hype that began in the mid-90s, built the foundations for the contemporary wired world. When the internet media turned to bust in March 2000, it made a bit of a mess. The trouble spread from Silicon Valley to the larger economy, which went into recession. More than $5 trillion in stock market value was destroyed. The unemployment rate rose to 6% from 4%. Well, now Silicon Valley is in the middle of an artificial intelligence boom that bears some obvious resemblances to the dot-com boom. For all the similarities, though, there are differences that could lead to distinctly different outcomes. The main one is that AI is being financed and controlled by multi-trillion-dollar companies like Microsoft, Google, and Meta that are not in danger of going bust, right? It's not pets.com. Amazon is not selling less toothpaste while it shells out billions on AI data center. Google is still profitable while it is developing foundational AI models. Another difference, there are not very many regulatory barriers standing in the way of AI. Also, if people are already sort of hedging their bets and the economy on the AI level continues to grow, well, that suggests, again, that there's some underlying productivity increase. The New York Times reports that the dot-com boom and the AI boom were both narrowly focused. 80% of venture investments in 2000 went to internet companies. This year, 64% went to AI startups. But otherwise, the two booms have diverged in scale. The three most highly valued companies of the dot-com era were Cisco, Microsoft, and Intel, all of which supplied the technology that made internet startups possible. Each was valued around $500 billion at its peak. Today, NVIDIA is valued at $4.5 trillion. It and the other AI companies, Google, Meta, Amazon, and privately held OpenAI, probably worth $17 trillion in capitalization. So there is some insularity to the industry, and it means that probably these companies will not go bankrupt, or if one does, the others will pick up the sort of pieces. So maybe we're protected from the severe downsides of an AI bust-up. With that said, will there likely be some winnowing? There will likely be some winnowing that happens here. Right now, OpenAI is in a massive battle with Google. Gemini 3, which is the latest Google model, is incredible. It really is great. If you spend a lot of time with it, it far outpaces ChatGPT 5.1. I've spent time with both of them. Frankly, I think that Gemini is really outpacing its competition in a lot of these areas. Well, now Sam Altman over at OpenAI has made the dramatic call for a code red to beat back a rising threat from Google, according to the Wall Street Journal. The world's most valuable startup should pause its side projects like its Sora video generator for 8 weeks and focus on improving ChatGPT, according to Sam Altman. In doing so, Altman was making a major strategic course correction and taking sides in a broader philosophical divide inside the company, between its pursuit of popularity among everyday consumers and its quest for research greatness. OpenAI was founded to pursue artificial generative intelligence, but for the company to survive, Altman says, it may have to pause that quest and give the people what they want, which is fascinating. So again, this competition is going to have some winners. It's going to have some losers, but a lot of chips are in that AI basket. Maybe it works out fine, but this is why people are feeling a disconnect. They're looking at the debt-fueled deals that are generating these outsized returns on AI companies that are publicly traded right now. And they're feeling a little skittish at the same time that they're having affordability issues in their daily life that have, again, emerged over the course of the last 5 or 6 years. So you can see why people are feeling a little bit schizophrenic. So later today, the Federal Reserve is going to announce whether it is dropping the interest rates again. The high likelihood, of course, is that it probably will drop those interest rates. And when you take a look at the Kalshi markets, Kalshi is one of our sponsors. When you look at the Kalshi markets, what you see is a 98% shot, apparently, that there is a 25 basis point cut. So it's very, very likely, in other words, that you're going to get that interest rate cut. But with that said, is there a lot more room to cut? Who knows? And this brings up the question of what happens in the future with the Federal Reserve. Because Jerome Powell will be gone. Jerome Powell, his term is to end in very short order. The question is who replaces him. The frontrunner right now is Kevin Hassett, who is a loyalist to the president for sure. Here is Kevin Hassett talking about rate cuts, interest rate cuts, and he's saying that there's more room for interest rate cuts.
If you do become the Fed chair, Kevin, and he pressures you both privately but publicly on Truth Social or says it, and your economic judgment is rates should not be cut now, what do?
You just do the right thing.
What's the right thing?
Well, the right thing is if you think, like, what is the judgment? So suppose that inflation has gone from, say, 2.5 to 4. You can't cut rates then.
Okay, so it'll be interesting to see whether he holds to that. Again, you want an economy that is not fueled by just injecting liquidity from the Federal Reserve every 5 seconds. That for sure. It'll be interesting to see how the AI investment bubble goes. If there's a winnowing, when will it happen? Right now, it seems as though that market is going to remain fairly hot for the foreseeable future. The next move by the Trump administration, if it worked for AI, it should work for everything else. Deregulate. Get out of the way. Let the markets generate more productivity. That's true everywhere from agriculture to heavy industry. Let them do their work. And the president has done a lot of this already, right? He did this with regard to deregulating the car industry, getting rid of those CAFE standards that were forcing everybody toward electric vehicles. Right? He has done this with regard to government regulations on the environment, which has prevented businesses from being able to pursue efficiencies that really don't damage the economy very much. So he's gotten rid of a lot of those regulations. We need more of that and less of the interventionism. Already coming up, we'll be joined by Senator Joni Ernst, as well as our own investigative reporter, Luke Rosiak, talking about the problems of fraud in the U.S. government. First, the best deals of the year are still live right now at Jeremy's Razors, and we are taking up to 50% off. Now is the time to get your final gifts and stock up for yourself. You want a full year of shaving? $49.99. That's it. No games, no virtue signaling, just a damn good razor that actually works, and helps you shave your face. If you're ordering over $100, free shipping. These razors are built for men who don't back down, guys who show up, work hard, refuse to cave to the nonsense. Head on over to jeremysrazors.com right now. Don't wait. Order by December 15th for delivery by Christmas. jeremysrazors.com. Well, something else that President Trump can do is crack down on waste, fraud, and abuse. That's something that he tried to do with Doge, but it's going to require more than that for the future. It requires some legislative fixes. Joining us on the line is Senator Joni Ernst, as well as Daily Wire investigative reporter Luke Rosiak to discuss. Senator Ernst, why don't we start with you? You are holding a Senate hearing on a massive DEI scheme that has been created by the federal government, apparently Small Business Administration program expanded under Joe Biden. Why don't you explain what exactly is going on?
Absolutely. And thanks so much for having us on today, Ben. This afternoon, I will be chairing the Small Business Committee hearing on various types of fraud through small business programs and the Small Business Administration. And the one in particular, and we're so glad to have Luke Rosiak joining us as a witness today. The one that we will focus on is the 8A program, which was meant to assist small businesses that were supposedly socially and economically disadvantaged. But we have found a boatload of fraud in this program. So typically, we will find when fraud is associated with this program, you may have a minority business owner who will then get these contracts and then subcontract out that work to a small business or even a large business that's not really socially or economically disabled. So that's just one example. But we're exposing the 8A program fraud. We're exposing COVID fraud that has happened. Look at Minnesota. And we will also be exposing fraud that happened in the USAID program as well. So again, it's going to be a great hearing this afternoon talking about the failures of these programs in safeguarding taxpayer dollars.
So, Luke, obviously, you've been covering a lot of this for Daily Wire. What are some of the issues you're going to be talking about at this hearing?
So I'm so glad they're having a hearing about 8A contracting. I've been saying for many years it's the most corrupt program in Washington. And if you do think about the Somali fraud in Minnesota, think that times 1,000 and then just repeat that for half a century. That's what it is. Because it's giving benefits oftentimes to non-Americans over Americans. This was a program that gives preference in government contracting to minorities, and it was created in 1978 mostly to help black people. But now we have this whole mix of different ethnicities in the country, so you could be fresh off the boat from India, and they'll give you preference on an IT contract for the U.S. government over an American, even though you were born here and an Indian person is there. That's actually a member of the most wealthy ethnicity in America. And obviously Indians are not underrepresented in IT. And then the other element that reminds me of Minnesota is the widespread fraud that everybody kind of knew about, but nobody was willing to say anything. And so we're all pretending that they're actually doing this work and not subcontracting it out to other people. And you have these defense contractors that are getting contracts, and they don't actually have to bid them out. They don't have to compete them. They can just get a contract, like to build a tank. And the reason they have that exemption to do something so corrupt, to give a contract directly to one company instead of competing it, is because we pretend that they're native Alaskans. And I think it's time now to kind of drain the swamp and be honest. We all always knew there weren't Eskimos working at these defense contractors. The whole thing has been sort of a fraud that skims off about 5% of all federal contracting dollars for this fake DEI scheme that actually doesn't do anything to help anybody.
So, Senator Ernst, obviously, you are the chair of the Senate Committee on Small Business and Entrepreneurship, and you've introduced the Stop 8A Contracting Fraud Act. How much of this fraud could be undone by better action through the actual Small Business Administration? Obviously, the Trump administration is in charge of the executive branch. And how much are you just trying to kill these programs now? Because, there will be a Democrat at some point in the future, you have to assume, who's going to use the legislative capacity here in order to expand these programs.
Right, exactly, Ben. And actually, there is a lawsuit that is ongoing right now, which kind of undercuts the premise of the 8A program. And Luke is absolutely right. We have all kinds of minorities that will qualify for the program. There is no rhyme or reason. There's no data behind this. There's no science behind this. They being the federal government and Small Business Administration, have through the years just continually added different ethnic groups to be considered racial minorities. And again, no rhyme or reason. We have Pakistanis that will fall into this program, and yet Afghans won't, and nobody knows why or how that happened. But again, the lawsuit is out there. We think it'll undercut a lot of these programs already, making these programs unconstitutional for the federal government to engage in. But what I want to do, though, is uncover the fraud and make sure that, yes, we are putting appropriate measures into place to audit programs, whether it's the 8A program, whether it was the money that went out the door during COVID, any of our federal government programs. I have purview and oversight of small business by virtue of being the Small Business Committee chair. And so that's what I'm focusing on today with this hearing. There is so much fraud, waste, and abuse out there. Just in that 8A program, there was one case that was $550 million of bribery that went into, moving some of these contracts around, getting contracts, subcontracting them. It's just egregious, the dollars that are pouring out that, my folks in Iowa have had to work really hard, in their jobs to pay taxes that then get handed out to these fraudsters. Minnesota, that's $1 billion worth of fraud that happened. And Luke has uncovered so much of this in his investigative journalism. We could go on and on and on for days on the fraud that has occurred.
Well, the hearing this afternoon, very important hearing. Senator Ernst, Luke, great to see both of you. And thanks so much for the hard work you're doing to ferret out this sort of fraud.
Thank you, Ben.
All right. Meanwhile, I think that Republicans, we noted at the top of the show, Republicans did not do well in Miami in this mayoral election. And that comes on the heels of Zohran Mamdani winning in New York and Abigail Spanberger winning in Virginia and the loss of a few special elections around the country. When a party wins a national election, as Republicans did in 2024, the general tendency is to believe that now you have a mandate and that you are in the ascendancy. That may not, in fact, be true. It may be that a lot of people voted for you just because they didn't like the other guy. When we live in a binary election system, in fact, that is the most common answer as to why people vote. They're not necessarily voting for a thing. They're voting against a thing. And this is where I think that Republicans have to be very careful, because Republicans can tell themselves a story where we are now in the ascendancy culturally. We are in the ascendancy religiously. But what may actually be happening is that the most visible anecdotal evidence is in our favor, but the general statistical trend is not in our favor. And that's something we need to keep an eye on if we want to be accurate about the solutions that we actually posit. So there's a fascinating article in the Washington Post about religious practice in the United States. And what it finds is two things. One, general religious practice among young people is actually in the decline. It is not on the incline. It's on the decline. It's been on the decline for a long time. But the people who are religious are getting more religious. If you misread those trends, you tend to think either that all Americans are going secularist or that Americans, broadly speaking, are becoming more religious. The first trend is being noted by Democrats, who are ignoring a growing number of young people who are becoming more religious. But that growing number of young people who are becoming more religious does exist in a context in which fewer young people, generally speaking, are becoming religious. So in other words, if 7 out of 10 young people used to consider themselves religious, and now it's 5 out of 10, but of those 5, 3 are now very, very, very religious. Republicans are reading those 3 who are now very, very religious as bigger than they are, and Democrats are pretending they don't exist, and that is the divide. But on an electoral statistical level, Democrats may be more likely to be right than Republicans are. This is a very important divide, because if you're trying to game for the future, what the Republican Party looks like, who the Republican Party is appealing to, how you build a coalition, you do need to be accurate about the state of play. So according to the Washington Post, even as fewer and fewer young people consider themselves religious, a small percentage of young adults are practicing their faiths with unusual avidity. This cohort of people in their early 20s are rejecting both religion by habit, just doing whatever your parents did, as well as secularism, skepticism, and agnosticism that grew among their parents' generations, religious experts say. And the examples of this surge, albeit anecdotal, are visible across faiths, including traditional brick-and-mortar worship of Catholicism, more Jewish students attending the growing number of Chabad centers, and more esoteric spiritual practices, even including Wicca-based full moon rituals and the West African system of divination called Ifa. So in other words, in a time of chaos, people are looking for something to belong to. And that can be something great, like engaging more deeply in biblical faith. Or it can mean that you're going to go out and howl at the moon. According to a campus chaplain, he said, in the past, it was more that you went to mass out of obligation. But despite the religious indifference of parents, there's now a line at the campus center because more and more people are interested in engaging more deeply. But that, again, comes amid a climate of less religious practice over time. According to an analysis of 2023-2024 Pew data released on Monday, 56% of 18 to 24-year-olds identified with any religion. That is down from 74% in 2007. So if you're somebody who believes in the importance of religious practice and adherence in America, that is a terrible statistic. It means, again, that just more than a bare majority of 18 to 24-year-olds even identify with a religion. Also, among 18 to 24-year-olds, a separate Pew survey finds about 5 times as many people have left Christianity since childhood as have converted to the faith. However, Gallup polls find worship attendance among adults under 30 is up from 19% in 2020 to 25% this year. And anecdotes abound that a subset of young people is collectively pursuing spirituality in a highly individualistic era. So looking at those countervailing trends is really important, and noticing what's actually happening is important, because what it means is that you will get a rise in radical socialistic atheism. You will, because that is the natural outgrowth of fewer and fewer people who are even culturally Christian. But at the same time, you're going to get a very right-wing traditionalist response that is convinced that because the church pews are swelling in those churches, that that is a majoritarian movement, when in fact it may not be. And that's really important to keep in mind as we consider electoral blocks and how things are going. Now, of course, this season, Christmas season, is a time when many Christians engage with their religious faith. Joining us on the line to discuss is Matt Fradd of Pints with Aquinas. And so Matt knows much more about this than I do. So Matt, tell me about why this season is so important.
First of all, I need to say I'm so thrilled that I'm gradually edging Michael Knowles out of the Daily Wire in regards to his Catholic commentary. That's something we can all
it took
celebrate.
5 seconds. The minute that option was available, Matt, you were there. You were on the spot. We may have hired you in order to edge Knowles out of this particular spot. That is definitely a reality. So.
Yeah, well, I'm really pumped to be here, first of all. I'm just thrilled about everything. And on Saturday, I sat down with Dr. Scott Hahn, who's a biblical scholar, convert from Presbyterianism. And we recorded a beautiful Christmas episode for Daily Wire that comes out today on Daily Wire Plus, and then next week we'll go out to the public. And so we talked about Christ as a long-awaited Messiah, and even just this like bizarre idea that Christians have, hey? Like, in 1 Corinthians chapter 1, St. Paul talks about the scandal of the cross. I mean, it's such a scandal that the Mohammedans reject it outright. That it's like, and I kind of get it superficially. I see why you would do that. We talked about the scandal of the manger. This idea that God became a zygote. It's pretty wild. It's ridiculous. Becomes a fetus, like breastfed. That's bananas. But we think it's true. And so we spent a good deal of time talking about that, and it was a great time.
So one of the things that is worth noting is that this week was the Feast of the Immaculate Conception. So tell me about that, because honestly, I think that people have the wrong idea of what exactly that means. Like, what does that mean, actually?
First of all, the very fact that you think that a lot of people get it wrong shows that you know more than most Catholics, who are convinced that it has to do with Christ's conception in the womb of the Blessed Virgin Mary. It doesn't. The idea is that we would say that we have been redeemed by Christ, medicinally, you might say, after the fact. But the Blessed Virgin Mary, because of her special role in being the mother of God, was preserved free from original sin and actual sin from the moment of her conception. This is the idea. So it doesn't mean that Christians don't believe that Christ could not have been born of a sinful woman, say. He could have. He's God and could have been born of a prostitute, and it wouldn't have affected his dignity at all. The idea is that it was so fitting that, again, the mother of God, because of her role, would be preserved from all sin. There's a lovely line from St. Augustine that really drives this home. He says, He whom the heavens cannot contain, the womb of one woman bore. She ruled our ruler, she carried him in whom we are, she gave milk to our bread. And so from the earliest days of the church, you have people talking about the Blessed Virgin Mary as being sinless, spotless, without stain. And so on the Feast of the Immaculate Conception, we celebrate that.
So obviously Christmas is coming up. There's always a big debate every single year in conservative communities about the commercialization of Christmas, the turning of Christmas into a sort of season. And listen, as a Jew, I really enjoy it. Obviously, I love the lights. Half the Christmas music that's great was written by Jews. But what should Christians be thinking about as Christmas approaches to get more out of the holiday spiritually and out of the season spiritually?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think when I was a younger man, early on in marriage, I tended to be like really legalistic and upset about the fact that people were celebrating Christmas too early. I've kind of chilled out a little bit, and I really enjoy watching Christmas movies with my kids and drinking eggnog and all of that. But I do think it's probably important to distinguish between the Advent season and the season of Christmas. And so Advent is a time of preparation for Christmas. It's kind of like a mini Lent in which we maybe fast, pray more, go to confession if we can as Catholics, and then just sort of prepare our hearts for the Christmas season, which actually hasn't begun yet, right? So according to the Catholic Church, the Christmas season will begin on Christmas Day. So it's nice to keep those in mind. But no, I'm like you. I'm thrilled about watching Elf with my kids and drinking eggnog and enjoying the lights. I mean, we can all just kind of calm down, and not everything has to be a war. And even if it is a war, sometimes there's some benefits from the commercialization of it. I don't know. I kind of like it.
Yeah, listen, It's a Wonderful Life is one of the great movies ever made. And so if you have a chance,
100%.
you absolutely should watch It's a Wonderful Life in this Christmas season. So go check out Matt's brand new episode with Dr. Scott Hahn. It's a DW Christmas episode. It comes out this afternoon on DW Plus as well as Locals. It's out to the public December 15th. Matt, it's great to see you, and Merry
Thanks,
Christmas.
Ben. Thank you.
Alrighty, meanwhile, Democrats are also misinterpreting the movement. They are seeing that they are winning elections in some interesting places, and they have decided apparently to go whole hog. The kind of brain capture that happens in victory is quite real. Mayor-elect Zohran Mamdani, apparently according to the New York Post, has now picked a controversial rapper who did 7 years in state prison for armed robbery to advise him on the criminal justice system. Slow clap for New Yorkers, guys. You outdid yourselves this time. Myson Lennon, 49, a Bronx convict turned activist who was found guilty of 2 felony heists in the late 90s, was appointed by the Democratic Socialists to sit on his mayoral transition's criminal legal system committee. That's just one of many questionable picks for Zohran Mamdani. This person obviously has something important to contribute. He had been part of a crew that robbed 2 cab drivers in the Bronx. Apparently, they pulled off a robbery of a taxi driver in 1997 and then a gunpoint theft from another cabbie in 1998. And so it's great. We got criminals in New York trying to make jail policy. That would be great. Meanwhile, Mamdani is apparently telling illegal immigrants how to avoid ICE, which is a fascinating move for someone who supposedly wants to bring law and order to the streets in New York.
Last weekend, ICE attempted to raid Canal Street and detain our immigrant neighbors. As mayor, I'll protect the rights of every single New Yorker, and that includes the more than 3 million immigrants who call this city their home. But we can all stand up to ICE if you know your rights. If you encounter ICE, these are the things that every New Yorker should know. First, ICE cannot enter into private spaces like your home, school, or a private area of your workplace without a judicial warrant signed by a judge. That looks like this. If ICE does not have a judicial warrant signed by a judge, you have the right to say, I do not consent to entry, and the right to keep your door closed. Sometimes ICE will show you paperwork that looks like this, and tell you that they have the right to arrest you. That is false. ICE is legally allowed to lie to you, but you have the right to remain silent. If you're being detained, you may always ask, am I free to go, repeatedly, until they answer you.
I mean, he's just a community organizer, and you guys elected this to your mayoralty. Like genius level stuff there, New Yorkers. And we'll see how this plays for New Yorkers as life gets markedly worse. Okay, meanwhile, big controversy continues to swirl around the attempt to buy Warner Brothers. So Netflix struck a deal to buy Warner Brothers. Paramount is now launching a $77.9 billion hostile takeover offer for Warner Brothers Discovery. Paramount, which is run by David Ellison, is arguing its all-cash $30 a share offer for all of Warner, owner of networks like CNN, TBS, and HGTV, as well as HBO Max, is a better deal for shareholders and more likely to also pass regulatory muster. Netflix had agreed to pay $72 billion, or $27.75 a share, for Warner's studio and the HBO Max streaming business after the company splits itself in two. So this could set up a very fascinating public battle for the future of Warner's assets. Paramount said that its offer is backstopped by the Ellison family and Redbird Capital, as well as $54 billion of debt commitments from Bank of America, Citi, and Apollo Global Management. Paramount also says it has commitments from sovereign wealth funds of Saudi, Abu Dhabi, and Qatar, as well as Affinity Partners, the private equity firm of Jared Kushner. And all those groups are agreeing to forego any voting rights, which could ease the deal's path in Washington. Apparently, Netflix's CEO said that actually, they're very happy with the offer that they made to Warner Brothers, and they expect to consummate that offer. The involvement of the government has been one of the questions here. President Trump suggested over the weekend that Netflix's deal could be a problem and that he would be involved in deciding whether to bless that deal. Now, this seems to me problematic. I do not like the government involved in private business transactions. This is not a monopoly concern, frankly. With that said, obviously, this is one of the biggest business transactions in the history of business transactions. And it'll be interesting to see whether Paramount's gigantic offer, I mean, they're going right over the top of Netflix here, whether that gigantic offer is successful in court, because there are regulatory burdens that have to be overcome. There are, in fact, questions about whether the shareholders can overcome the leadership of the Warner Brothers board. Interesting stuff. Alrighty, coming up, we'll get into the latest over Venezuela, Some Republicans like Rand Paul, very, very critical of the president of the United States. Remember, in order to watch, you have to be a member. If you're not a member, become a member. Use code Shapiro at checkout for 2 months free on all annual plans. Click that link in the description and join us. A lot of the economic numbers look really good. So why do many Americans feel so bad about the economy? Plus, another terrible crime story out of Charlotte, North Carolina, and the Somali American fraud scandal continues to percolate. First, this is it, the last day to get 50% off your new annual Daily Wire Plus membership. Let me repeat that. 50% off Daily Wire Plus annual memberships. That ends tonight. It is our best deal of the year. Got to lock it in right now. Get everything we make, including the incredible 7-part series, The Pendragon Cycle, Rise of the Merlin. 50% off Daily Wire Plus annual memberships. Will not return for another year. Do not miss this deal. Join now at dailywire.com/subscribe. Well, folks, it feels as though there is a gigantic disconnect between how the stock market is actually doing, how the economy is actually doing, and people's feelings about the economy. If you look at the statistics right now, the overall inflation rate in the United States is around 3%. That's 50% higher than the Fed's target rate, but it is, in fact, a sort of moderate inflation rate for American history. It's higher than it has been for the course of the last couple of decades when we had unusually low inflation rates, but it is not 8-10%. If you look at the overall unemployment rate in the United States, it is currently 4.4%. That is a historically low rate. If you look at the average across the last 50 years of American history, what you see is that the average unemployment rate in the United States is closer to 6%. And of course, if you looked this morning at the opening of the Dow Jones Industrial Average, the Dow Jones opened nearly 48,000, which of course is historically high, very high. And in fact, the Dow Jones is up year on year about 8%. Okay, so these are big, booming numbers. These are good numbers for the economy, just overall. And there's reason to believe that the stock market is actually going to increase from here, even if people like me say that there is a bubble and that bubble will inevitably burst. Because whenever you have a major new technology like, say, AI, there's an enormous amount of spending that goes into that new tech, big build out, more investment, many companies. And then the expectations are not met by reality. There's a bit of a bust. But the best companies survive and end up transforming the economy. That's the story with the automobile industry. That's the story with the internet. It's the story, I think, also with AI. Even with that said, we may be in for a ride before that bubble bursts at all. As the Wall Street Journal points out, there are many factors that are currently leading to wild bull market optimism on Wall Street. According to the Wall Street Journal, there are 5 factors that suggest that investors are feeling pretty good about the stock market. 1, stock valuations could be worse. Stocks currently look very expensive, like price to earnings ratios, which is what I talk about. The price to earnings ratios right now are totally out of whack for companies like, for example, Tesla. Tesla's earnings on an annualized basis represent a tiny fraction of its actual stock valuation. But the stock valuation of Tesla is not based on how many cars it's selling. It's based on its AI play. It's based on a robotics play. It's based on a wide variety of experimental plays people figure are going to pay off in the long run. And so looking at their car sales is not a good proxy, says Tesla, for what the company is actually worth. Many Wall Street analysts think that the best way to value stocks is to compare their earnings yield, that's their earnings to price ratio expressed as a percentage, with yields on ultra-safe government bonds. One popular version of that metric, known as the excess CAPE yield, uses S&P 500 companies' average earnings from the past 10 years and adjusts both those earnings and the 10-year Treasury yield for inflation. Now, as of November, it stood at 1.7%. That is low by historical standards, suggesting the high prices of stock have shrunk the reward for owning them over bonds, but it's not unprecedented. It's actually up from 1.2% in January. Economic growth is also supporting earnings because while there is concern right now about job growth and while there is concern about layoffs at some major retail companies, the reality is that many people believe that job growth has slowed largely because of the sharply reduced illegal immigration happening in the United States. And holiday spending has been pretty strong. Weekly unemployment claims have remained pretty low as well. Now, again, we're still missing some statistics from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, but it shows that things remain relatively robust. It is not, by the way, just about the big tech stocks. Now, I have said before that the vast majority of gains accreting on Wall Street are happening at the top end of the market. And statistically, that's true. But that doesn't mean everybody else is doing poorly. The Russell 2000 index of smaller company stocks reached a record high last week. The S&P 500 equal weight index, which gives the same influence to each company regardless of size, is also near a record, providing a hope that the tech-censored sell-off would not be disastrous, that even if the Mag 7 take a hit, that the rest of the stock market won't collapse. inflation expectations are also anchored, meaning that nobody believes that the inflation rate is going to go down to zero at any point. But the Fed is looking at cutting interest rates anyway, and prospects for longer run economic growth have actually improved. Negative yields on 10-year TIPS showed investors expect rates to stay at rock bottom levels for the foreseeable future. Yields have stabilized at pre-crisis levels. So, says Thanos Bardas, senior portfolio manager, co-head of investment grade at Neuberger Berman, for a lot of investors, you have higher confidence to invest in general, whether it's equities or fixed income, when real yields are positive. It looks like the economy is operating at potential or above potential. So in other words, things look like they should be pretty good. And it does look as though there is now a solid move in the Kalshi markets. They're one of our sponsors. There's a move in the prediction markets, not just in favor of a federal decision to cut rates by 25 basis points come December, but a massive move. If you recall, in November, for a little while, it looked as though the markets had moved in favor of the Federal Reserve maintaining its rates, that it would not, in fact, cut those interest rates, that there were worries about inflation, there were worries about affordability. And so the kind of going logic was that the Federal Reserve would keep rates steady. Well, for some reason, since then, there's been a gigantic spike in investment in that prediction market in favor of the cut. So either somebody's trading on inside information, which wouldn't be totally crazy, or it is quite possible that the Federal Reserve is looking at the kind of slowing employment numbers and the relatively mediocre inflation rate and saying that they are more worried about an unemployment increase than they are about an inflation increase. All of which means that if there's more money injected into the economy, the stock market is likely to continue going up and the unemployment rate is likely to stabilize. In just a second, we'll get to why people seem disturbed by the economy, even though the numbers are pretty good. First, this episode is sponsored by our friends over at ZipRecruiter. So, if you've ever seen the original Miracle on 34th Street, it is a fantastic movie with Edmund Gwen. It's really, really charming. It's beautifully shot. But to make holiday favorites, it takes a team of talented people, from actors to editors to props people, the sound crew, and more. And when it comes to building such a team, whether it's for the entertainment industry or a wide range of other industries, you need to hire the right people. The best way to do that is with ZipRecruiter. Right now, you can try it for free at ZipRecruiter.com/dailywire. ZipRecruiter makes building your dream team incredibly simple. Their smart matching technology quickly connects you with top talent in your area, so you're not wasting time sifting through unqualified candidates. Plus, you get instant access to their resume database, where you can unlock contact information for the best candidates right away. It's no surprise they're the #1 rated hiring site on G2. Make your hiring a little merrier with ZipRecruiter. 4 out of 5 employers who post on ZipRecruiter get a quality candidate within day one. Just go to this exclusive web address right now to try ZipRecruiter for free. ZipRecruiter.com/dailywire. Again, that's ZipRecruiter.com/dailywire. ZipRecruiter is the smartest way to hire. Also, are you still searching for that perfect gift for Christmas? Our sponsor, Legacy Box, is the simplest, safest way to convert your old family videotapes to digital for just $9 each. It's the most meaningful gift you can give. It brings back irreplaceable memories to life. Legacy Box makes it incredibly easy to bring your old memories into the digital age. They're the world's largest digitizer. They've helped over 1 million families preserve everything from embarrassing 90s haircuts to precious videos of loved ones' first steps. The process could not be simpler. Just pack up your old VHS tapes, camcorder tapes, and photos. Send them in. Their team will digitize everything by hand right here in the United States. You'll get your originals back along with digital copies on a thumb drive or in the cloud, protected forever from floods, mold, and the inevitable decay of time. Imagine gathering the family this holiday season to watch all those old holiday mornings you recorded years ago, now crystal clear on the big screen. And we did this for my family, and watching, those old videos of me as a baby walking around my parents, and my parents have those same videos about their parents. It's amazing. With a decade of experience and trusted by millions, Legacy Box makes it safe and simple to keep your treasured memories alive. Legacy Boxes are still in stock and ready to ship. Don't let another holiday pass without saving the moments that made your family who they are. Make this holiday season special by giving the gift of memories. Get your family's videotapes converted for just $9 during this exclusive last-minute holiday offer from Legacy Box. Go to legacybox.com/Shapiro. That's legacybox.com/Shapiro. So why do people feel so terrible about the economy, right? That's the big question. And the answer, of course, is that what you are getting right now is an embedded feeling about inflation from before. People had an outsized expectation of what could be done when Trump entered office. Obviously, wages would have to increase an awful lot in order to make up for the inflation we have seen since 2020. We've seen this massive, massive inflation in costs since 2020. And that's because the government just helicoptered money around, which created gigantic inflation, less in terms of wages than in terms of costs, particularly in places like housing, which has a lot of obstacles to building new housing. Scott Bessent, the Treasury Secretary, he says that the economy is continuing to outperform expectations. He's correct about this.
Mr. Secretary, a lot of people are out there holiday shopping. Here is how the president described back in April what to expect from this season.
Maybe the children will have $2 instead of $30, you know? And maybe the $2 will cost a couple of bucks more than they would normally.
Was the president's prediction then correct?
Margaret, it's actually been a very strong holiday season, and we've seen across all the income cohorts thus far, and so there's nothing to say that they're $2 instead of $30.
The president was wrong to predict lower numbers of purchases and higher prices.
The economy has been better than we thought. We've had the 4% GDP growth in a couple of quarters. We're going to finish the year, despite the Schumer shutdown, with 3% real GDP growth.
And Scott Bessent went on to say that one of the reasons we're seeing affordability problems is because of scarcity and overregulation due to Democratic policy, largely in blue cities, which is true.
Democrats created scarcity, whether it was in energy or overregulation, that we are now seeing this affordability problem. And I think next year we're going to move on to prosperity.
You do think there is an affordability problem?
Sorry?
You do believe that?
I think the Biden administration created a terrible...
No, but now we're nearly 12 months in. You said the president would own the economy at this point.
I said that the Biden administration created the worst inflation in 50 years, and maybe for working Americans, the worst inflation of all time. And we have pulled that number down.
Okay, and he is right about all that. Again, the thing that Americans expected is not a thing that could be delivered. What the Trump administration has largely done is stabilize prices, at least compared to wages. What they have not done is radically reduced prices, because in order, again, to radically reduce prices in any field, you need either a gigantic increase in supply or a radical reduction in demand. And when it comes to things like housing, even a radical increase in supply is going to take some time. And you're not going to get a reduction in demand for any of this stuff unless you actually see an economic recession, which is the opposite of what the Trump administration would like to see. There's a reason why Jamie Dimon is pointing out that the consumer is basically fine, but inflation is not going down, which seems to be correct. JP Morgan Chase CEO Jamie Dimon said on Sunday, in the short run, it looks like the American consumer is doing fine, is chugging along. Companies are making profits. Stock markets are high. That could easily continue. There are little small negatives. Jobs are weakening, but just a little bit. Inflation is there and maybe not going down. Now, one thing that Dimon said that's really interesting is he's looking at AI. And a lot of the concern right now, particularly among younger Americans, that AI is going to take their jobs. And what he says is jobs have gotten a little weaker. Wages have gotten a little weaker. And when you talk to businesses, they're going to be a little bit more cautious hiring. That's not because of AI. That's just because they want to do more with less. I don't think AI is going to dramatically reduce jobs unbelievably next year. Now, next year, of course, is not the entire concern. There could be, long-term job loss from AI in particular industries. But there is, in fact, a gigantic disconnect between how people are feeling about the economy, particularly young people, and what the economy is actually doing right now. And so we have to try and understand why that's happening. According to a brand new poll from Harvard Kennedy School Institute of Politics, more than 40% of 18 to 29-year-olds surveyed last month said they are struggling or just getting by. 1/4 believe they'll be worse off financially than their parents. Now, again, to be fair, a lot of people struggle when they're 18 to 29 years old. Now, I was a Harvard Law School graduate, and I remember essentially living paycheck to paycheck with my wife for at least several years early on in our marriage. I remember there was a point where we were thinking of taking out a second credit card in order to pay off the first credit card. We were I think, down to $2,000 in our savings at one point. So it's kind of normal to struggle when you're 24, 25, 26 years old. The question is the directionality. Do you feel like you're going to get out of it? And well, it's not just that young people feel like they are struggling. They are concerned about what comes next. So there's widespread concern over inflation. That includes 37% of all Americans, of all young Americans, believe that inflation is their top issue. That includes 36% of Democrats, 48% of Republicans, and 34% of independents. Other concerns include healthcare, housing, jobs, taxes, and wages. What's fascinating is that, again, when people feel unsettled, it is not as though they come down squarely in one ideological camp. They actually start just losing faith in pretty much all ideological labels. One of the most interesting results from this Harvard-Harris poll was a question about support for ideological categories in economics. And what the poll showed is that in 2018, 43% of young people said that they supported capitalism. That went up to 45% in 2020. And today it is 39%. So it's down fairly significantly. Democratic socialism, however, is down dramatically. So these sort of Bernie Sanders, wild redistributionism schemes, 39% said they supported that in 2018, 40% in 2020, only 29% today. So capitalism, according to this Harvard Kennedy School Institute of Politics poll, according to that poll, young people still favor capitalism over democratic socialism by 10 percentage points. As for socialism proper, like the nationalization of resources, only 21% of young people say they support that ideological category, which again is really, really interesting. In other words, they don't know where to turn. The one thing that it seems like they want is quote unquote strong leadership. When people don't know where to turn and they want strong leadership, that is not necessarily a wonderful thing. Now, as far as right track, wrong track, when you look at this youth poll, what it shows is that a huge number of people believe that the nation is headed into the wrong track. 4% of Democrats, of course, say the nation is headed in the right track. They're very upset with President Trump. 33% of Republicans say that the nation is headed on the right track. 27% wrong track, 39% unsure. So those aren't stellar numbers even among Republicans. More than half of Hispanic and Black respondents report financial hardship, compared with 39% of white peers. Financial insecurity is sharply higher among non-degree holders, 53%, than among college students, 28%, and graduates, 32%. And again, economic pressure is the defining force in young people's lives. There's nothing atypical about that. That, of course, is true. And so that requires us to ask if, in fact, young people do have it historically bad. Now, by some measures, they do. In terms of the percentage of income they are spending on housing, that is way higher than it was, say, 40 years ago for their parents in 1980. 1980, percentage of income spent on housing was lower than it is today. And we can get into that in a moment. But to pretend that unemployment rates are just gigantic among young people, particularly college graduates, would be to ignore the actual statistics. The unemployment rate for new law school graduates, for example, like the more educated you are, the better chance that you're about to get a pretty good paying job. That seems to be the pattern. That has resulted in some pretty terrible college policy in which we seem to believe that if we artificially inflate the number of people who go to college, then we will also artificially inflate their career prospects, which of course is really, really silly. It turns out that when you look at the bell curve of earnings, that bell curve remains, even if you take the entire bell curve and shift it up by 2 years in terms of years of education obtained. By the statistics, the unemployment rate for new law graduates is somewhere between 4.5% and 5%. For overall engineering graduates, that'd be like electrical, petroleum, mechanical. The overall employment rate is 0.9 to 2.3%, which is really, really low. It's basically a 0% unemployment rate. So those would be a lot of the jobs that are currently being ignored in favor of liberal arts majors, which again is one of the reasons why the government should not subsidize majors that are unlikely to earn out. Computer science and computer engineering, that may be one area where AI is cutting in, because AI is designed by engineers to replace engineers in many ways. For medicine, there's a 100% employment rate. So there's certainly areas of the American economy where you can get a job. Again, the unemployment rate today remains steady at 4.4%, and there's still well over 7 million unfilled jobs in the United States. So one thing that is worth noting about the way that people perceive the lifestyle in America is largely location dependent. You know, this is something that I've pointed out before, and I've gotten a lot of flack for it. But living in Austin, Texas is not the same thing as living in New York. That is just really true. It is basically true. And if you're looking, for example, at the price of housing and the elevated price of housing, it's very difficult to average the elevated price of housing between areas of the country that are more suburban or rural and big cities. Big cities universally have gone way up because more Americans have moved to those cities and fewer Americans are moving away when the opportunity does not present itself. This is why a few weeks ago, people seemed to get very uptight when I said, listen, there are things we can do in places like New York City to lower housing prices, create more affordability. Those things are not rent freezes. That is subsidizing building of new housing, getting rid of overregulation, making it much easier to cut through all the red tape. All of that can be done. But New York City is never going to be as affordable as Des Moines, Iowa. It's just not going to happen. New York is a restricted area in terms of the amount of land available. It is much more expensive to build there. There are many more people there. And so just again, supply and demand suggest that when demand is really, really, really sky high, like it is in big cities like LA, Chicago, New York, that the housing price is going to be higher than it is where demand is not nearly as high. And none of this is a moral judgment. It is just a fact. And so the point I made is if you're a young person, if you're 20 years old, 21 years old, and you're struggling to afford a place in New York City, and you can find a comparable job in Minnesota, you might want to think about moving. Because just for your own betterment of life, it might be worthwhile to consider not being in New York. And this notion that you are owed the same level of affordability in New York as you are in Des Moines, Iowa, or Minnesota or something, that's silly. That is not how reality works. I also wish for a pony that craps gold, but that's not actually how reality. New York will never be as affordable as St. Petersburg, Florida. It's just not going to happen. And pretending that it is, well, I mean, that's a bad way to do life. That doesn't mean we can't make political changes or that we shouldn't. Of course we should. But one of the reasons that you're seeing unaffordability, particularly in major urban areas, is because of high demand and low supply. Well, the high demand is part of that equation. And it is true that the myth that young people have been sold that they never need to move at any point, especially when they are young, before they have kids, when they are first getting out in the world, that's had a real impact in terms of public policy and in terms of pricing. And all these factors have to be taken into account when we determine why things are unaffordable. Because the question is why things are unaffordable, not whether it is moral for things to be unaffordable or not unaffordable. Okay, why are things unaffordable? Well, one reason is because, according to our sponsors at Comet, a project of perplexity, I asked, are 21-year-olds moving less today in the United States than they did in 1980? And is that creating upward pressure on housing prices and downward pressure on wages in major cities? And the answer is yes, residential mobility among young adults has fallen substantially since 1980. And this reduced movement is one factor among several that can raise housing costs in thriving cities, but its effect on wages is more complex and not uniformly downward. Data from the current population survey and related research shows a broad, long-run decline in U.S. residential mobility since the 1980s. In the 1980s, about 20% of Americans moved every year. By 2018-2019, only about 10% did, with especially steep drops among young adults and in short-distance moves. So what is the effect on housing prices? Lower mobility can reduce the flow of people from high-cost, opportunity-rich metros to cheaper areas, keeping demand high in superstar cities, while supply is constrained by zoning and other limits, which tends to push up prices and rents. One of the things that happens in overcrowded cities is NIMBYism. People don't want a gigantic apartment building going up right next door to them in major cities sometimes. They don't want a gigantic block that is filled with cheaper housing going up right next to where they live, may lower their real estate values. And so they vote to stop all of that. And these are political reality. Now, you can try to ban those sorts of regulations and stop those sorts of regulations, and that would be good. But is that going to solve the problem? Obviously, it's not, which is why you've seen mass population movement from north to south. It's why you've seen in-migration to popular regions like the Sun Belt, according to Comet. Now, again, standard economic theory predicts that more workers moving into a city should put downward pressure on wages there, unless local productivity or demand rises enough to offset the larger labor supply. So this is the other problem. If you have a lot of people who are in a city and you have more people moving to that city, that is creating more demand for housing, and it is going to mean less available supply of jobs, right? Because you have more people who are seeking the same job. That creates competition for the jobs, which means that the wages tend to be lowered. So this would explain some of the affordability dislocation. And in fact, when you ask Comet, what percentage of the American population lived in major metros in 1980 compared to today? In 1980, roughly 3/4 of Americans lived in major metros. Today, it is closer to mid-80%. According to the Census Bureau, about 76% of the U.S. population lived in metro areas in 1980, which meant that 1/4 of Americans did not. Okay, so that meant less upward pressure in these major cities. As of 2024, non-metropolitan counties held 14% of the U.S. population, implying that 86% live in metro areas under current federal definitions. So more and more people have been moving to these cities, and fewer people are leaving. And so, again, none of this is inexplicable. It does mean that how do you solve some of this stuff? Well, number one would be you need to get rid of subsidies that lie to people, because subsidies that pretend that affordability can be achieved simply through signing people checks. When government checks go into an area, affordability is usually not the result. Inflation is usually the result in cost. That is true in education. It is true as housing. It is true in healthcare. It is true everywhere. And so government solutions are not going to be the ones that actually fix this. The best the government can do is get out of the way and let the markets fix it themselves. Already coming up, what exactly can President Trump do to fix the perception that the economy is on the ropes? We'll get to that in a moment. First, this episode is sponsored by Chef IQ. Cooking for the holidays is a huge stress for a lot of people. You might find yourself standing at the stove wondering, is it done? Did I just ruin dinner? Am I about to be banned from the kitchen? That's why the Chef IQ Sense is a complete game changer. It turns, I think it's done, to I know it's perfect. With your Chef IQ Sense, you just insert the probe into whatever you're cooking. It monitors everything wirelessly, but it doesn't just track temperature. It actually tells you what to do, when to flip it, when to take it off the heat, even how long to let it rest before slicing. It's like having a personal chef in your kitchen, guiding you through every step without any of the judgment. The best part, I can actually relax with the family now. Instead of running back and forth to the oven every 10 minutes, I'm sitting at the table with the kids and wife, actually enjoying myself. The thermometer sends alerts right to my phone, so I know exactly what's happening. I actually made steak for the first time using Chef IQ recently. I know, I've tried to make steak before. It always comes out totally raw in the middle and charred on the outside. Well, not anymore. Whether you've been cooking for decades or you're just starting out, this thing makes you look like a pro every single time. No more guessing, no more anxiety, just perfectly cooked meat that has everyone asking for seconds. If you're looking for a gift people will actually use and thank you for, this is it. This season, give yourself and your loved ones the gift of perfectly cooked meals with Chef IQ. With my promo code BEN, you can save 30% and get all your shopping done. Go to chefiq.com, promo code BEN, chefiq.com. Also, this episode is sponsored by our friends at Bambee. You know what's funny? When we started Daily Wire, we thought the hard part would be the great content. Turns out, dealing with all the behind-the-scenes stuff is the hard part, like the HR, the hiring issues, the employee issues. I know I'm not alone. When you're a business owner, every second of your time is incredibly valuable. So don't waste your energy and risk losing money dealing with time-sucking payroll issues, office politics, and HR infractions. Focus on the stuff that matters most, running your business with help from Bambee. Here's what makes Bambee different. They give you access to your very own dedicated HR manager at a fraction of what it costs to employ somebody full-time. And get this, Bambee costs just $29 a month, whether you have 10, 75, or even 100 employees. If I had Bambee when I was first building the team, it would have saved me countless hours and headaches. Instead of getting bogged down with paperwork and compliance issues, I could have focused on growing my show and connecting with the audience. With Bambee's HR Autopilot, you'll never have to waste your valuable time getting into the weeds of HR policies, onboarding, or terminations. Plus, Bambee's month-to-month, no hidden fees. You can cancel anytime. Right now, get 1 month of Bambee for just $1. Go to Bambee.com and type in Ben Shapiro under podcast to schedule your first call with an HR manager right this moment. That's 1 month of Bambee for just $1 at BAMBEE.com. Ben Shapiro podcast. So what exactly can President Trump do? Well, the Trump team is trying to get him to focus in on affordability concerns. According to the Wall Street Journal, just before President Trump left the White House for Thanksgiving, top aides met with him in his private dining room to discuss inflation and the economy in hopes he would calibrate his message on affordability. In another meeting last month, this time in the Oval Office, aides presented Trump with surveys from one of the president's own pollsters detailing voters' concerns about cost of living. His team has begun showing him social media posts that illustrate how Americans view the economy. Top aides have taken turns talking to their boss about his economic messaging and the need to emphasize what voters are feeling. Almost every senior White House official is involved in this effort. So far, Trump has largely avoided any I feel your pain messaging telling aides the economy is strong. I mean, again, this is one area where I have serious empathy for the president of the United States. As a facts, not feelings guy, I get the aversion to saying, yes, all your concerns are totally justified. And I understand why people feel things are unaffordable. Also, there are decisions that people can make in some circumstances in order to make things less unaffordable. And when Trump looks at the broad-scale federal economy, he's thinking to himself, what are the things I'm supposed to do that I am not currently doing? He has dismissed Washington's focus on affordability as a trap set by Democrats, intent on papering over the administration's economic achievements. In many private conversations, Trump has argued former President Biden was responsible for inflation, not him. And again, I have nothing but sympathy for the president on this. He is right about this. He's right about this. So, how do you solve all of that? Well, one thing could be present a plan. Okay, so what exactly should that plan be? Well, part of that plan should be making clear to the American people where the jobs are, where the opportunity is. So, if you're going to talk about subsidizing people to do things, perhaps the administration should consider the possibility of helping to subsidize people moving from more expensive areas to less expensive areas where the jobs are. Or continuing to facilitate, through federal regulation, tax breaks for moving from a high tax area to a low tax area, or from a more unaffordable place to a less unaffordable place, to a more affordable place. Those might be some things that we could think about doing. However, the easiest political path is always to find an enemy and then club him with a bat. And the president seems to have settled on the idea that there is food price fixing, and that's why all of this is happening. Now, this is, again, just a variation on a theme that Joe Biden tried. Joe Biden tried this. He tried to say that prices were really high because of evil corporate greed and collusion, and it wasn't true. This notion that what is happening at the grocery store level is anti-competitive behavior in the food supply chain. There may be particular areas in the food supply chain where that is true. With that said, is going after those companies going to somehow lower the food prices? It'll be interesting to see. I mean, one way you can lower the food prices, presumably, is to get rid of some of the tariffs on some of the food prices. You've already done that on things like coffee and bananas. Okay, but again, the disconnect between the statistics on the economy and how people feel about the economy, a large part of that is attributable to not only media coverage, which of course is very anti-Trump, but also it is attributable to the fact that there is an economic hangover from the Biden administration that is very real. And now Trump's been the president for a year. So you own whatever is happening now, even though it was really embedded from a year ago. And also the fact that a huge percentage of people are now living in major metro areas. And those areas are, in fact, more unaffordable than other outlying and surrounding areas. And people are moving less because they've been told over and over and over again that it should be somehow affordable and, in fact, thriving to live in New York City when you are 21. And you see people who are 21 comparing themselves to people who are 50. Why don't I live the life that my father or my grandfather lived? Well, you are living a better life than your father or grandfather did at the same age. But you're not living a better life than your grandfather does now because your grandfather is 70 and he's been in the workforce for the last half century. Well, one thing that the Trump administration is doing with regard to the economy, aside from talking about the stock market success and the unemployment rate, one thing that they are doing is redirecting away from that and toward the crime issue. So another horrific crime happened in Charlotte, North Carolina yesterday. There's a very fraught Senate race for Republicans that is happening in the next election cycle. That is an open seat because Tom Tillis, the Republican senator, is stepping down, and Michael Whatley is running against Roy Cooper in that seat. That is going to be an extraordinarily expensive race. If Republicans lose the North Carolina Senate seat, that takes them down to 52. It's also a decent bellwether for what happens in 2028, because if Republicans are losing North Carolina across the board, that's a real problem for whomever is the nominee in 2028. And so Charlotte, North Carolina is sort of epicenter of purple politics right now. According to the Daily Wire, a twice deported illegal immigrant with a rap sheet allegedly brutally stabbed a man on a Charlotte, North Carolina train. Honduran illegal immigrant Oscar Gerardo Salazarno Garcia is accused of stabbing a man with a large fixed-blade knife on the light rail on Friday, leaving him in critical condition. He was first deported from the United States March 9th, 2018, before he crossed the border illegally again, and then was removed again in 2021, according to the Department of Homeland Security. He then sneaked back in undetected for a third time on an unknown date. He was previously arrested for aggravated battery with a deadly weapon, destroying evidence, resisting arrest, using a false ID. He also has convictions for robbery and illegal reentry. Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem called it a heinous attack, saying her agency has taken action to ensure he faces justice. Noem said that ICE lodged an arrest detainer to ensure that this particular stabber is not released back into North Carolina neighborhoods. But she said, we cannot guarantee the country will honor the detainer since they have a history of not cooperating with ICE. Both President Trump and the Transportation Secretary, Sean Duffy, commented on the incident. President Trump put out on Truth Social a statement, another stabbing by an illegal migrant in Charlotte, North Carolina. What's going on in Charlotte? Democrats are destroying it like everything else, piece by piece. Meanwhile, over in Los Angeles, we were told, you remember, that ICE raids in MacArthur Park were terrible. We should not have any immigration authorities over in MacArthur Park, which is not one of the nicer areas of Los Angeles, MacArthur Park. Well, it has become a drug-ridden, terrible place to be, MacArthur Park. Not a shock. Here's some of the video from the New York Post. So you can see, I mean, these are people just shooting up in the open air. I mean, it's horrifying. This kind of stuff is just horrifying. People sitting on the seat in rows. An occasional arrest. The ground littered with used needles, people who may be sleeping or dead just on the sidewalks.
So that way, we have the fog lights.
Remember, the federal government was ripped up and down under President Trump for the great crime of sending federal agents into MacArthur Park, which we were told is a place kids play. I used to live in L.A. You generally don't send your kids unaccompanied to MacArthur Park. That is not a real thing. According to the New York Post, MacArthur Park has erupted into LA's fentanyl ground zero, a collapsing chaos-soaked war zone where overdoses hit by the hour, people die daily, crime crews corner the market, and what used to be a neighborhood park now teeters on the brink of total collapse. The park, the largest green space in the district, now hosts an unknown number of unhoused people, that's homeless, though on most days it's fair to estimate the population in the hundreds. MacArthur's unofficial residents are made comfortable by groups handing out food and even free crack pipes as part of safe smoking kits. So that there's no such thing as safely smoking crack, but the idea is you won't get AIDS. With tens of millions of dollars coming from the city to support the park's inhabitants. Along a narrow chute residents call Fentanyl Alley, dead rats lie underfoot. People are passed out in the open, fentanyl-fueled and dangerous. A notorious stretch locals say is among the park's most perilous. Again, it is turned into a complete disaster area under the auspices of a Democratic administration in Los Angeles, and yes, under Governor Gavin Newsom. Meanwhile, over in New York, Zoran Mamdani says that he is going to end homeless camp sweeps, which of course is going to make the city significantly more unlivable. According to Michael Goodwin, writing for the New York Post, the new mayor inadvertently revealed he has learned nothing about homelessness when he announced on Thursday his administration will not dismantle the fetid camps springing up around the city. The reason, he claimed, is that Mayor Adams' policy of removing the camps lacks compassion and has not led to the people involved being placed into permanent housing with appropriate social services. Mamdani said, if you're not connecting homeless New Yorkers to the housing they so desperately need, you cannot deem anything you're doing to be a success. And then he said, whether it's supportive housing, whether it's rental housing, whatever kind of housing it is, because what we've seen is the treatment of homelessness as if it is a natural part of living in the city, when in fact it's more often a reflection of a political choice being made. Well, it is a reflection of a political choice being made, a choice to let people sleep out in the open, do drugs in the open, and live in their own filth. I mean, I used to live in LA. I watched the homeless problem take over the entire city. Apparently, Zoran Mamdani wants to do that in New York as well. These local governance issues are going to be a major issue come 2026 and 2028. Meanwhile, controversy continues over the immigration situation with regard to Somali Americans in Minnesota. Now, all of this, of course, is tied into Joe Biden's radical open borders policy, and that is tied into stories like the story that we just saw in Charlotte, where people are repeatedly crossing the border over and over and then committing crimes. According to the New York Times, in the weeks after Joe Biden was elected president, advisors delivered a warning his approach to immigration could prove disastrous. By the way, I do find it hilarious that these stories are now being reported in December 2025. So if this was happening 4 years ago, 4.5 years ago, shouldn't we have been told that the immigration problem was an actual problem 4.5 years ago by places like the New York Times at a higher pitch than they were doing, at the very least? Biden has pledged to treat unauthorized immigrants more humanely than Trump. But Biden was now president-elect. His positions threatened to drastically increase border crossings, experts advising his transition team warned in a Zoom briefing in the final weeks of 2020, according to people with direct knowledge of that briefing. That jump, they said, could provoke a political crisis. Chaos was the word the advisors had used in a memo during the campaign. They offered a range of options to avert that crisis by better deterring migrants. Biden seemed to grasp the risk, but he and his top aides failed to act on those recommendations. A New York Times examination of Biden's record found that he and his closest advisors repeatedly rebuffed recommendations that could have addressed the border crisis faster and eased what became a potent issue for Trump as he sought to return to the White House and justify the aggressive tactics roiling American cities today. Former Biden administration officials told The Times that Biden and his close circle of confidants, including Ron Klain, Mike Donilon, Jennifer O'Malley Dillon, and Anita Dunn, made two crucial errors. First, they underestimated the scale of migration that was coming. Second, they failed to appreciate the political reaction to that migration, believing that stronger enforcement would alienate Latino and progressive voters, and that a border surge would not be an important issue to most voters. And of course, that turned out not to be true at all. Well, the consequences of open borders policy have been disastrous, obviously, and the most obvious iteration of a gigantic open borders policy is not merely the number of illegal immigrants in the country, generally speaking. It is enclaves of immigrants who also came here legally through the expansion of the definition of asylum and refuge to include hundreds of thousands of Somali immigrants living in the United States. This is broken out into the open, obviously, in the aftermath of this $1 billion welfare fraud that encompassed a wide variety of members of the Somali community in Minnesota. The media have chosen to take one angle. Their angle is that it's racist to notice this. It's terrible to notice this. So, for example, here was CNN's Dana Bash going after the president's immigration watchdog, Tom Homan, on Somali Americans.
Are ICE agents stopping people because they look, quote unquote, Somali?
No, they're not. The law requires agents are trained in Fourth Amendment training every 6 months. Border Patrol's trained in Fourth Amendment training. They stop. You can detain and question people for a short period of time based on reasonable suspicion.
And what is that suspicion?
Federal statute.
Is it based on how they look?
No, their appearance alone can't raise reasonable suspicion. It's articulable facts, a lot of different facts taken into consideration. And the Supreme Court just backed the Trump administration up on this. I know a lot of the media says, the Supreme Court just justified racial profiling. That's not what the Supreme Court said. Supreme Court said they agree with the way these operations are being conducted because the standard of reasonable suspicion is being used by both ICE and the Border Patrol in the interior operations.
Again, the basic idea here is going to be, apparently, that it is very bad for Homeland Security to try and track down illegal Somali immigrants because it must be race-based, as opposed to the fact that there are, in fact, illegal Somali immigrants living in Minnesota. I mean, this is a point that Homan is making to Dana Bash. He says, listen, there is a large illegal Somali community in Minnesota.
There's illegal alien community, large illegal alien community there. If you're a U.S. citizen, you have nothing to fear. We're looking for criminal aliens. And also, if you're a resident alien, you have like a felony conviction by statute, you could be set up for deportation. So we're looking for public safety threats, national security threats, and illegal aliens. Nothing's changed, Dana, from day one.
Okay, so, he is right about that. Meanwhile, the administration is saying, listen, Minnesota, if you don't fix your Medicare fraud problem, you're going to lose your Medicaid funding. Why should the American taxpayer have to subsidize your state fraud?
Either fix this in 60 days or start looking under your couch for spare change, because we are done footing the bill for your incompetence. This administration will never stop fighting to protect the vulnerable Americans who rely on these programs and the taxpayers who fund them. We're going to crush waste, fraud, and abuse.
And that is Dr. Mehmet Oz, who, of course, is presiding over CMS, which is the service that has to determine whether, in fact, waste, fraud, and abuse are happening inside Medicaid. And again, apparently, the left-wing response to this is not to call out the fraud or to fight the fraud. It's to call anybody who notices it racist. So here, for example, is a host on MS Now asking Keith Ellison if they'll arrest ICE agents.
Should the police officers be, arresting ICE folks who they feel are using excessive force?
Look, the police chief, Brian O'Hara, great man, by the way, is well able to speak for himself. But I think what he's hoping is to prevent. This is why he's making the comment now, so that it doesn't ever come to that. So that ICE agents will observe the requirements of the law, and that and that they will know that we're not going to stand by and let them break the law.
Okay, it's unbelievable. You got Keith Ellison, that's the state attorney general in Minnesota, claiming that ICE is going to be held accountable to the law while he presided over a state that allowed $1 billion in welfare fraud from a Somali community allied with, wait for it, Keith Ellison. Ilhan Omar, whose district this took place in, she, of course, is very upset with the president of the United States for noticing. So she went after Stephen Miller, who is the immigration advisor, the top immigration advisor for President Trump, calling Stephen Miller, who happens to be Jewish, a Nazi.
When I think about Stephen Miller and his white supremacist rhetoric, it reminds me of the way the Nazis described Jewish people in Germany. And, as we know, there have been many immigrants who have tried to come to the United States who've turned back, one of them being Jewish immigrants.
Listening to this woman gallivant around talking about the plight of Jewish immigrants to the United States during the Holocaust as a supporter in rhetoric of Hamas, Hezbollah, and every other terrorist group attempting to exterminate Jews all over the world, it's a little rich. Is this going to be a winning play for Democrats? I think not. There's a reason why the administration is focused in on crime and illegal immigration. Those are winning issues for them, and they have to wait for the American people, presumably, to get used to the new level of inflation that is just a part of our lives now. Meanwhile, the president is apparently unhappy with Kristi Noem. According to the Bulwark, two unnamed former DHS officials who served under both Biden and Trump say that Trump is indeed considering moving on from Kristi Noem potentially really soon. A third ex-DHS official who served under both described the situation as fluid. Now, of course, this could be nonsense. You have unnamed officials who served under both Biden and Trump, meaning they're not Trump loyalists, so they could be attempting to undermine Trump by attacking Kristi Noem. Apparently, Trump personally likes Noem, but a lot of White House officials are frustrated with her leadership, specifically her employment of Chief Advisor Corey Lewandowski, who, according to sort of most reports, is allegedly her boyfriend. A big-name Republican could theoretically replace her. Yeah, I think it is unlikely that Kristi Noem goes, but it doesn't mean that it's totally impossible. The other official who supposedly was on the hot seat, but who actually is not, is the Secretary of War, Pete Hegseth. So Hegseth, over the weekend, did an interview in which he talked about the fact that the Washington Post had promoted a false story, which is that he literally argued in favor of a double tap strike on people who were just floating around in the water. That report was basically debunked by the New York Times. Here is Secretary of War Pete Hegseth at the Reagan National Defense Forum.
Did you at any time say that everybody on board should be killed?
Is anybody here from the Washington Post? I don't know where you get your sources, but they suck. Of course not. Anybody that's been in the Situation Room or they've been in the war room there, the Secretary's office, no, you don't walk in and say, kill them. It's just patently ridiculous. It's meant to create a cartoon of me and the decisions that we make and how we make them. It's ridiculous.
Okay, so, again, he is openly denying that report. He said, we're tracking narco-terrorists and killing them. The thing that I think most Americans who follow the news very closely need to understand about how all Americans follow the news is that people get a gestalt sense of the news. What that means is that they have sort of an overall picture of the things that are happening without following the details. So while everybody who is nitty-gritty involved in the grime and details of politics is very focused in on who said what and when was the order given, most Americans are going to take away Pete Hegseth wants to kill narco-terrorists trying to ship fentanyl and cocaine into America, and people opposing him don't want him to do that. I mean, that's a win for Hegseth. It just is on a PR level.
The days in which these narco-terrorists, designated terror organizations, operate freely in our hemisphere are over. These narco-terrorists are the Al-Qaeda of our hemisphere, and we are hunting them with the same sophistication and precision that we hunted Al-Qaeda. We are tracking them, we are killing them, and we will keep killing them so long as they are poisoning our people with narcotics so lethal that they're tantamount to chemical weapons.
And so, again, it's going to be very tough for Democrats to argue against this, but Trump and his entire administration have the magical gift of being able to get Democrats to defend literally anything up to and including narco trafficking. Adam Schiff, who you'll recall from his ridiculous Russiagate nonsense for years on end, he says that the strikes on these boats are unconstitutional and morally repugnant. I would actually say that trying to ship drugs into the United States would be more morally repugnant if we're going to try to put a marker on it, but okay.
Based on what you know, do you believe these boat strikes are legal?
No, I don't. They're unlawful, they're unconstitutional, and killing two people who are shipwrecked at sea is also morally repugnant. I agree with Tom. We should do everything lawfully that we can to stop the scourge of drugs coming into this country, but this is not at all lawful or constitutional. And frankly, if the Pentagon and our defense secretary is so proud of what they're doing, let the American people see that video.
Yeah, well, again, you want to do this? You want to play this game? All right. Tom Cotton, the senator from Arkansas, he properly says, listen, if there's a boat loaded with drugs to kill Americans, it's a valid target and we should blow it out of the water.
Any boat loaded with drugs that is crewed by associates and members of foreign terrorist organizations that are trying to kill American kids, I think is a valid target. I'm not just comfortable with it. I want to continue it.
Okay, so again, that is on the good side of the Trump administration PR ledger. On the bad side, the Trump administration's use of the pardon power has been exorbitant. The Trump administration, of course, has now pardoned an ex-Honduran president who was charged with major narco trafficking. And this, again, is going to be an awkward situation for Republicans trying to defend. Here is George Stephanopoulos over the weekend grilling Senator Eric Schmidt of Missouri on Trump's drug pardon, and there's not a great answer for this, unfortunately.
What do you mean you're not familiar with the facts and circumstances of the pardon? It's been well reported all across the country. He's the former president of Honduras. He was convicted of conspiring to bring in 400 tons of cocaine into the United States, also guns and other materials. It's been front page news across the country. Aren't you curious about that?
Well, I'm curious about your pushback on that particular point. With your previous guest, you had zero pushback because he's giving the Democrat talking points like you spew every single week, which is probably why your ratings are so bad. But to make the point, what I'm saying is that you're trying to divert here the attention from what the American people actually support.
Okay, so again, it's going to be hard for Republicans to defend that. I mean, if the best that we can do is just slapping George Stephanopoulos, I mean, it's fun, but I'm not sure that it's going to do the work. Meanwhile, another pardon of Trump's has now gone awry. According to Mediaite, in a blistering post to Truth Social early on Sunday, the president has now bashed Representative Henry Cuellar of Texas for announcing his intent to run for re-election as a Democrat after receiving a pardon from the president, who's facing charges for allegedly taking over $600,000 in foreign bribes. His wife was also charged. So Trump wrote, "Can you imagine? The Democrats under the crooked Joe Biden administration, who always use extreme force and jail time to destroy their political opponent, wanted to put Congressman Henry Cuellar and his wife Imelda in prison for 15 years, which I predicted these radical left lunatics would do. And they never stopped wanting to fulfill this evil quest. The Dems mercilessly went after Henry with everything they had. They were looking to destroy him, his lovely wife, his 2 young daughters, and anyone close to them. When the Democrats overwhelmingly lost the 2024 presidential election and power with it, they regardless did everything they could to keep going after the Cuellar family. The Dems were vicious, and all because Henry strongly wanted, correctly, border security." But Trump has now changed his tune. Quote, "Only a short time after signing the pardon, Congressman Henry Cuellar announced that he will be running for Congress again in the great state of Texas, a state where I received the highest number of votes ever recorded as a Democrat, continuing to work with the same radical left scum that just weeks before wanted him and his wife to spend the rest of their lives in prison and probably still do. Such a lack of loyalty, something that Texas voters and Henry's daughters will not like. Oh well, next time, no more Mr. Nice Guy." So I do not love the pardon power. It is not my favorite part of the Constitution. It is typically misused by members of both parties, and this one seems like a giant fail. Okay, meanwhile, in meaningless news, the Trump administration has secured the World Cup for the United States, and this means it was time for President Trump to receive an award from FIFA. I mean, listen, I'm glad that the World Cup is coming to the United States, though I have no great adherence to soccer at all. Nonetheless, the president was joined by FIFA President Gianni Infantino for the World Cup draw at the Kennedy Center. And there, Trump was given a prize, which I have to say, this is quite an ugly trophy. I mean, really, really an ugly trophy. I have a bizarre sort of predilection for hideous trophies and hideous statues. That my favorite is of a soccer player, Ronaldo. It is one of my favorite things in the world, is a horrible statue of Ronaldo that does not appear to be him. It appears to be some sort of bizarro Superman version of Ronaldo. Anyway, here was Trump receiving this award, which appears to be a set of human hands springing from the bowels of hell and holding up the globe. It is not, yeah. Anyway, here it was.
Mr. President, this is your prize. This is your Peace Prize. There is also a beautiful medal for you that you can wear everywhere you want to go.
I'm going to wear it right now.
Okay, let me hold. Fantastic. Excellent.
So President Trump gets that prize. And then he said, I think the worst thing he's ever said as president. He said, it's time to rename American football. No. This right here, this is the globalist cuck agenda. There will be no renaming of American football. Sure, it makes no sense that football is called football since we mostly use our hands in football. Nonetheless, this is ground that we will not cede as Americans. Under no circumstances will we rename the sport with the oblong object that we throw from football. We're not doing that. And you all over the world who keep calling soccer football because it's a sport that you play with your feet. It is literally a ball that you kick with your feet and thus is called football. We're not bowing to you. We won't. Just as the metric system makes far more sense than the system of measurement we use, but we will never bow because Anglo-American power. Here, this is just American power. We're not doing it. So President Trump, I love President Trump, but I got to say, this is one of the worst things he said as president right here.
When you look at what has happened to football in the United States is, again, soccer in the United States. We seem to never call it that because we have a little bit of a conflict with another thing that's called football. But when you think about it, shouldn't it really be called? I mean, this is football. There's no question about it. We have to come up with another name for this.
Yeah.
It really doesn't make sense when you think about it.
Don't think about it. America first, baby. American football is called football, even though it doesn't make any sense because we're America. That's all. Alrighty, coming up, the Supreme Court is set to rule over the firing of executive branch officials by the Trump administration. Is it constitutional? Is it not? What does it mean for the future of what Trump is trying to do? First, remember, in order to watch, you have to be a member. If you're not a member, become a member. Use code Shapiro at checkout for 2 months free on all annual plans. Click that link in the description and join us.